listening to the Jersey Guys Podcast, the show that talks about hard rock, heavy metal, AOR, and West Coast music. In-depth conversation and special guests are always on tap, so settle in and turn it up. Now, here are your hosts, Tom and Mark.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Jersey Guys Podcast. I'm Mark Ballo, and I'm going to be joined by my co-host Tom Coyne as we bring you our brand new podcast. We hope you guys enjoy this, so please follow along on our Facebook page and also subscribe to our YouTube channel where we're going to be uploading brand new episodes every week. And it's something Tom and I have always wanted to do. For probably the last couple of years we've been talking about it, and we finally got it off the ground. So we hope you guys enjoy it. We're going to really be talking about a lot of different types of rock music, everything from hard rock and heavy metal to AOR and even some West Coast music, because who doesn't love a little bit of yacht rock? Now for our first episode, we thought we'd do something a little different. We thought the perfect guest to kick things off would be Phil DiBenedetto, who is the owner of Zig Zag Record stores in Brooklyn and Staten Island, New York. Both locations were legendary independent record stores, and especially the Brooklyn location where it all started. Phil shares some great stories and reminisces with Tom as they talk about their 40-year friendship, some of the times from Zig Zag, including the legendary in-store appearances. They even talk about their favorite bands and concerts. It's a real nice trip down memory lane, and if you were a regular at Zig Zag, you'll love hearing Phil's stories. It really was a great way to debut our podcast, and we hope everyone enjoys it as much as we did. So without further delay, let's get right into the interview with Phil DiBenedetto from Zig Zag Record Stores. Hey everybody, this is Mark from the Jersey Guys Podcast. I'm here today with my co-host Tom Coyne, and we've got our special guest today, Phil DiBenedetto from Zig Zag Records. Hey Phil, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Marky.
Good. Hey Tom, say hey to everybody.
How are you, Mark? It's good to be here, and we're finally getting this thing off the ground after about 3 months of debating about what we're going to do. So we're ready to go.
That's right. I know you talked about this probably 2 years ago, right?
It came up about 2 years ago.
It took us that long to get it off the ground. I had to do a lot of research and figure out how to get everything going.
I guess it took me to actually move to Jersey to get the Jersey Guys Podcast off the ground.
That's right. We couldn't officially be the Jersey Guys Podcast unless everybody here was from Jersey.
Exactly.
So now you're here. You're the newest member.
Welcome to Freehold, home of Bruce Springsteen.
I will leave that comment to drift into space.
There you go. So Phil, how's everything going?
I'm doing well. I'm still knee-deep in vinyl. After all these years.
Just to let everybody know, as Phil is the owner of the Zig Zag Records, which started out in Brooklyn, New York. And tell me a little bit about the store, when it started, when you got involved working there, and we'll go back to that beginning part of it.
The original store in Brooklyn opened in the mid-'70s, and it was Arnie, who was the original owner, with a partner, Gary. And I was just a customer, probably going there in the late 70s, excuse me. And I guess I was that kid that was always in there so much that they asked me to work there. Totally into the heavy metal stuff. That was my expertise. And as you know, that's when it started to have the resurgence in the late 70s, early 80s. And I jumped at the chance to work there.
So going back prior to you working at Zig Zag, how did you get into music yourself? What bands were you into early on?
I did have an older brother. He wasn't totally into the music, but into the music, and there were the albums. And I had an older sister who would love the Beatles. So that was my first introduction really to music, was the 45s of the 60s. And I love that stuff today also. But my brother had the Sabbath Bloody Sabbath album.
Nice.
And so as a guy in his teens, putting that on and listening to that was it for me. And he had, if I can remember, he was big into Johnny Winter, Black Sabbath, Santana. But I became obsessed with it. So I think the one that really turned me was Black Sabbath, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. After hearing that, I think I was hooked.
Okay. And then what did you how did you get involved with Zig Zag? You came in just as a
just
customer
as a customer. So I guess I was one of those annoying guys like you were, and no, I'm a kid. I lived in there, so I was there all the time, spending any money I had. And at that time, there was a resident heavy metal guy, hard rock guy. His name was Tony, and I'd always pester him and always wanting to, get his knowledge on what I should be listening to, old stuff, new stuff. And I became that guy. They asked me to work, he left, and then I became that guy. And so it never looked back. So I've been doing this, as a collector since the mid 70s, really, and never looked back. This is what I've done my entire life, which is crazy.
Now, what you started working there. At what point did you transition over to say, hey, I think I have the opportunity to buy this store and be the owner?
I always felt confident in my knowledge, and business wise, I was pretty good. I was a young entrepreneur because we used to. My friend Gary used to take pictures at shows, sneak in at those days when you had to sneak your camera in, and I bought a button machine. And we made buttons, and we'd sell them outside of the concerts, outside of the Palladium. He actually got arrested one time. And then I actually used to sell the buttons to Zig Zag before I worked there, and other places, Head Shop in Kings Plaza.
I remember that.
The Jolly Joint.
The Jolly Joint.
Yeah, and then I was totally into the whole thing. Like I said, I would tape shows. I had pen friends and tape traders. I was like totally immersed in the whole scene. Okay. And then, of course, going to shows.
Yeah. What were some of the bands you were into back then that you saw?
Oh, come on. Riot.
Where at?
Oh, they played Zappas. I saw Riot play in Marine Park Block Party.
Oh, wow.
But there was Zappas, which was close in Brooklyn. The Brooklyn Zoo opened up later.
That was
of course, L'Amour's, which we were there all the time.
Well, now that kind of brings us to the point where, so now you're working at Zig Zag. First of all, what time did you come in at this? Like, Tom, were you?
I was a '70s Zig Zag regular every weekend too. I would say my senior year of high school, which was 76, 77, 78. Me and Phil struck up a friendship, I want to say 81-ish, 80, 81.
So at that point, you were working at the store, or you were actually, when did you actually buy the store?
Approximately 85, 86.
85, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were actually just working there part-time. Tom starts coming in.
Yeah, I worked full and part-time, depending on what else I was doing at the time. Mm-hmm. I actually worked for Warner Electra Atlantic for a little while.
Okay.
Yeah.
Legs Diamond brought us together.
Legs Diamond?
Legs Diamond brought us together, yeah, because I used to go and I really didn't know Phil then. I knew Stan, who was a guy that worked there on the weekends. And because, like I said, I started there from the 70s when he was there, but we didn't know we didn't grow up together as kids. And I was in Zig Zag one day thumbing through endless barrels of records there, and I had the first Legs Diamond I was looking at, and he was behind the counter, and he screamed at me, "That's awesome!" And I was like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's like American Deep Purple," right, which was like one of my favorite bands. And I remember I bought the album, loved it, came in the next week to tell him how much I loved it, and then we realized how much we had in common, which was many things, one of which at the top of the list was our total adoration for Black Sabbath since we were kids. Okay. And it just took off from there.
That's good stuff. So now, one of the things I always wanted to, and I love hearing the stories about this, is the Zig Zag started doing the in-stores, right? Mm-hmm. And when did that all start?
Well, the first one, I believe, was Iron Maiden.
Really?
So, and that was when they first came over here, which had to have been, what,
81.
81.
Okay.
Now, I don't know, I was probably influential in setting that one up. Some of the other ones I definitely set up, but probably Arnie, who owned the store at the time, got in touch with, I guess, the management. And it was it wasn't that difficult, really, to set them up. Because all the ones that I called to set up, everybody said, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And especially later on when they were playing L'Amour's, it was a no-brainer in Brooklyn because you could stop at Zig Zag in the afternoon and play L'Amour's that evening. And
did you work with the guys from L'Amour to say,
very closely,
where you coordinated where bands were coming in
yeah.
and you're saying, hey, let's bring them over?
George and Mike were the owners, Alex the DJ. Yeah, we worked very, very close. We had a really good relationship with L'Amour's.
Who were some of the in-stores that you did? I know you mentioned the Iron Maiden with Diano.
There's probably so many I'm forgetting, but the biggest ones were we did Iron Maiden, the original lineup. We did Motorhead, original lineup, and after Brian Robertson lineup. Girls' School, Twisted Sister, Venom, and at the Venom in-store, Metallica was there. I know I did Crocus. I think we did Overkill. We did Anthrax. King Diamond.
Wow.
Babylon AD.
Okay. That's a little bit later period, right? Now, what kind of, this draw like huge crowds at some of these? Or
the early, Iron Maiden, yeah.
Lines around down the block and around the corner.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. That must be really cool. Now, basically, so you then buy the store and you continued to do the in-stores after you bought it? Or?
When I slowed down afterwards because I found them to be a lot of work.
Okay.
And, it got to be like a political thing. And I actually wrote some early on for like Metal Forces. I was doing some writing and reviews. I did some album covers. I did some bios. But as you probably know, it was hard to be honest because if you really didn't like something,
I had that problem when I was doing reviews for all those UK magazines.
It's hard to say. I think this stinks. You don't have to be that harsh, but it would be hard to criticize without offending.
Yes.
So all of a sudden now, record companies would call up and say, "Hey, do you want to do an in-store with such and such?" And you think to yourself, 5 people are going to show up, so it's going to be more embarrassing,
right?
Than it's worth. The guys come in, nobody shows up.
Well, that was that Babylon AD.
That was bad.
That was
nobody showed up.
Very few people.
More guys that worked there than guys that came.
Right. Like, can you get their autograph again, please? Just So I sort of soured on it. I became that at that point. I was thinking more business wise than fan wise. So
right now, at what point? How long did you have the Brooklyn store before you decided to open up?
A year and a half, 2 years,
and then you opened up Staten Island's location.
Yep.
Okay.
Which is amazing. I can think back on it because I started with nothing and. A year and a half later, I'm opening up a second store.
What made you want to say, hey, I'm going to open up a second store?
I just wanted to grow, and Staten Island at the time, I didn't know too much about it, but visiting there, I thought it had a good rock following. Mm-hmm. And if I was going to do it, I wasn't going to open up a second store in Brooklyn.
Right.
Long Island had a lot of stores. Staten Island really didn't.
Now, going back, I know we talked a few weeks ago, and we were talking about there was other Zig Zag locations prior. Yeah,
there was a lot. The guys who originally, Arnie and Gary, there was a Long Island store. I had worked in the Long Island store. It was in Glen Cove. It was short-lived. They had other stores that didn't last. I forget where. I think there was another one in Long Island. They sort of had a parting of the ways, and there was a really good Zig Zag in Manhattan. I had worked there a few times. That was a great store.
So there was 2 owners originally?
Yeah, 2 owners, and they sort of split ways.
Okay.
So the main store for the other owner was in Manhattan. That was First Avenue in the 90s. It was a really good store. And then he had closed that and then opened up on St. Mark's Place as Smash. Do you remember that?
I kind of remember the name.
He was right on St. Mark's as Smash.
That was by Sounds.
Right, across the street from Sounds, yeah. So realistically, the lineage of this, there was probably at least half a dozen stores or more, at least half a dozen or more that originated from the Brooklyn store.
Okay. So now, we talked about this, me and Tom, because we were saying one of the best things about like the independent record stores at the time is and back at that time when the music scene was so different. the characters that came in, right? I mean, you've mentioned some. You guys can talk a little bit about that.
Well, I've another likeness that me and Phil always had was for vintage professional wrestling, what it was back in the 60s and the 70s. And it was a lot of the same type of professional wrestling fans, heavy metal fans. There was a lot of similarities in that fan base, like very over the top, rabid, crazy fans, which we both were. And that just brings out a lot of crazy personalities.
We were all characters, including myself.
Right.
Everybody who worked in the store was a character, for better or for worse. Let's name Stan and Vinny and Russell. Everybody was a character, and all the customers were characters. Everybody had nicknames, whether they liked it or not. They got a nickname.
Exactly.
I was nasty, but I was kind-hearted. So it wasn't like I was giving you a nickname to belittle you, but that was your nickname, and everybody clung to their nicknames. So You had the Mosquito, and right.
You had
Staten Island Stud, but although I didn't give him that one.
You had Kevin the Animal.
Yeah.
You had Mike Death. You
Fat
had
Joe
Alfred the
Fleischer.
Hairy-Handed one. It was all in good fun. There was never any. I never was in that store in Brooklyn where there was like a fight or it was like everybody.
It was like Cheers. Everybody
exactly.
Everybody felt comfortable, and like you could be a freak and be welcomed.
Right. Absolutely. Right. And I think we kind of took a solace in being, because we were maybe freaks ourselves, but maybe not so overtly freakish as some others. But there was a kindred spirit amongst everybody.
And then, as Mark well knows, then it became a hangout. People would eat their lunch there, just hang out. And I was like, as long as you buy something, hang out as long as you like.
Well, that's what I kind of did. I mean, where I started going to the store, I actually became aware of Zig Zag. I've been a Jersey guy, all my life. So I never really... What?
Unlike me.
Unlike yourself for 3 months.
Right.
But no, I mean, I used to go to the local record stores around New Jersey, but then it was funny, and I've told this to Tom before. With me, I went to a KISS convention or KISS Expo, whatever you want to call it at the time. They were doing them in New Jersey, and you guys had a table set up. And I ended up buying a CD. It was an import CD.
So that's how I met you?
Yeah, well, I think I actually bought the CD from Russell.
Okay. Russell did it with me, yeah.
And I think he threw in a business card in the bag. So when I got home later that day, I'm looking through it, and I'm like, Zig Zag Record, Staten Island. I'm like, that's pretty close. So I had a vacation week one day, and I took a trip over, and that's how I first started going to Zig Zag in Staten Island. But,
so if people listening ever saw the movie High Fidelity, that's the closest.
Absolutely.
It never went to Zig Zag. That was the closest it was. Everybody was a character.
Yep. Totally.
But we could have did it better.
Yeah. Better taste of music.
So then how long did you eventually... I want to go back, actually, prior to this. Talk about, like, the original owner you said was Arnie? Was
Arnie Goodman, yeah.
Now, you told me at one point he managed bands and stuff like that?
Yes, he dabbled with Savoy Brown. I think he put an album out with Yngwie Malmsteen. He had some collaboration. What was it?
That band
Thrasher. I think
Thrasher.
With Carl Kennedy.
Yeah, he did. He had a big part of that band.
Yeah, he was involved in a lot of projects. And that's what made him, I believe, sell the store at the time to me, because he wanted to get involved in that.
I think it was Savoy Brown. He used to go out on the road with them.
Oh yeah,
he was like a road
friendly
manager.
with Kim Simmons. Yeah.
Yeah. He used to disappear for like weeks at a time and leave Phil in charge because he was on the road with them.
Oh, okay.
At the time, there was still something of a...
So now, basically, you had now, at this point, you've got 2 stores. It's like, what, 1987 or so right now?
Yes. Booming.
The what?
It was booming.
Well, the music, I mean, everybody was buying records. Records were selling. Bands were selling tons and tons of albums. I mean, that was such a different time than what it is nowadays. But, I mean, so how long did that carry on until you eventually ended up... You ended up selling the Brooklyn store?
Well, I had originally lived in Brooklyn. When I opened up Staten Island, shortly after I moved to Staten Island. So I had Staten Island and Brooklyn. And then I wound up moving to New Jersey. So to go from New Jersey to Brooklyn, Staten Island, to Brooklyn, to New Jersey, it was becoming too much. And we had the ticket master in Staten Island, not in Brooklyn. Too much responsibility, needed to be there. So it was getting too much to go back and forth to Brooklyn. So I was either going to close it and take the stock, or Stan at the time worked for me. He bought it from me.
Okay. And then you just basically concentrated on Staten Island for
Right.
a while. And eventually, I mean, towards the end there, and I actually started going, it was probably the late 90s when I was going to the Zig Zag in Staten Island. And then you eventually ended up closing Staten Island.
Well, you forget that I started on Staten Island in the smaller store and then had to go to the bigger store.
That's right. You had the 2 locations right next door. Right. That's right, yeah.
And at one time, I was the only ticket master on Staten Island.
Oh. I had some pretty big crowds showing up for tickets and stuff.
That's one of the reasons I used to hate to go to the store sometimes.
Huge crowds.
Yeah, it was you would go there to hang out and pick up your music, and there'd be
before the
200
internet,
people in the parking lot.
Yeah. Before the internet, remember what waiting online for tickets was like.
Sure.
And another reason I needed to be there was, at that time, was cash only, because you could imagine the responsibility.
Right.
That's right. Wow. So then you eventually ended up after, I mean, obviously everything changed. I mean, in the 2000s, all these downloading Napster, everything came along. It killed the whole, especially the independent record store business. I mean, at that point, you were living in Jersey already, right? So you were just like...
So I decided at that time, I could see the writing on the wall that this was just going downhill. It wasn't terrible, but it was going downhill. And I couldn't see that it was going to ever become what it was again. So before losing money, I decided, but there was still some years left. That's when I closed Staten Island, opened up in Jersey near where I lived, and worked by myself for the most part.
I remember, I think I only went to the Jersey.
It wasn't a bad store, but
it was a nice store.
But the interest just wasn't there the way it was.
Especially the way, I mean, just no one was buying records anymore.
Right.
That was the thing. So now, I mean, beyond the whole record store thing, I mean, I just listened to you two guys before we started recording here right now. I mean, you talked about shows you went to and things. What were some of the great shows that you guys saw? I mean, you talked about Lemoore, you talked about some of the other clubs in Brooklyn and stuff. But
well, you want overall from the 70s, that were the greatest shows?
Yeah.
Well, you know, we've talked about this a few times. I'd actually just talked about it with you, too. To get into the great shows that we've seen is more of a 70s thing because
arena rock.
Our age was such that we were a little bit on the older end of most fans of the 80s. So I know, speaking for myself, and I know also him, too, with the responsibility of the store, there were a lot of shows I missed. I mean, there was a ton of stuff I saw in the 80s, but a lot of stuff I missed because I had a responsible job. I had my own apartment. So I just couldn't live in these clubs back then. When in the 80s, if you wanted to see a band that was the headlining band, you saw at the earliest 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Sure, and Lemoore especially was...
Yeah, I was going to say Lemoore's. If you go back and look at the bands that played Lemoore's, and I don't even remember what shows I went to when I didn't go. I know after a while I got burnt out. Just couldn't do it anymore. But so many bands played them. If that was your era, I mean, you would have seen.
You could have seen every band. Really.
I mean, Kiss played there. Iron Maiden played there.
Yeah.
I really handpicked the stuff, you know, and I look back and I can pride myself and say that, you know, saw Badlands, I saw Leatherwolf at the Cat Club, I saw Lizzie Borden at the Cat Club, but I really had to handpick a lot of shows because I was in my later 20s and I wasn't an 18-year-old kid.
Well, go back further though. I mean, you talked about some of the shows. Did you guys go to shows together?
We didn't go. Did we go to that many shows together? I don't remember.
We went to. I actually didn't go to. I went to more shows with probably Vinny Lubrano and Rob Paris than I did with Phil. But I really pride myself on the stuff I saw in the 70s because
I saw Led Zeppelin.
Unfortunately for me and Phil, we're old enough to say we saw all these bands.
7th row center at Madison Square Garden to see Led Zeppelin. I mean, come on.
So did you see? Were you at that show too?
We were on different nights. I went on the third. I don't know what night you went.
I went 2 nights.
Yeah, he went 2 nights. I went 1 night. I certainly did not have seats on the floor. I was not in the blue seats, but I guess the old yellows at the Garden.
And then I'm a early album, like first album type guy with a lot of these bands. So if you see them on that first tour when they're playing most of the first album, you know,
Right.
So to see Iron Maiden when they first came here, that was amazing. To see early Judas Priest. I saw Judas Priest Sin After Sin tour. And then you used to get, at the Palladium, was 3 bands for anywhere from $3.50 to $7.50. So it was Judas Priest, Angel, and the Gods.
Right.
Okay.
That was a very common show, too.
I mean, to see all these bands, REO Speedwagon on, early tours, and it was amazing. The music was so great.
What are some of your favorite bands from that back then?
Well, Sabbath was always my number one.
Number one.
The greatest album to me ever made was Rainbow Rising. Huge Dio fan. Then there was the UFO. Who am I missing? There's so many.
Gary Moore.
Thin
Lizzy.
Guitar player. Thin Lizzy, one of my favorite. Phil DiBenedetto, the rock and roll hero, genius. Just list is endless. Nice. Big Whitesnake fan, but I like early Whitesnake, the blues era. Mm-hmm. The list is endless, really. If I named 5, I'd be disappointed later because I forget another 5 that I didn't name.
I think we always talk about, like, if you had to pick 1 or 2 things that identify, especially like with DVDs, we always say Deep Purple at the California Jam 1974 and Alcatraz live in Japan with Steve Vai.
And Rainbow Munich 77.
And Rainbow, right, those 3. If you take those 3 together, you say, okay, that epitomizes like what we love.
Yeah.
So now, what have you basically? When did the Jersey store officially close? When were you out of the record store?
I'm losing touch, but it was probably about 13 years ago.
About 13. And what have you been doing since then?
Well, I got a master's degree and was hoping for the first time in my life to get a real job back when I was 50 years old. But at that point, white males 50 years old need not apply for the most part. Mm-hmm. So, okay, now what am I doing? Well, just went back to what I've done all my life. I started selling memorabilia on eBay, and to this day, I'm doing it. I say I have probably over 200,000 pieces of vinyl.
Well, I can attest to that because I've been down in his dungeon. So.
And that's not mentioning posters and magazines, books, pins. The list is endless. So that's what I do.
And this is stuff you're still actively selling on eBay? Or this is your
I'm still actually, like a nut, I'm still actively buying, but yes. Buying and selling. Yes.
The nut gene never leaves.
No, it doesn't. As a matter of fact, it's reverted itself.
Me too, yes.
So you go through a phase where you're this maniac kid collector in your teens. You start growing older. You can't, you start getting more responsibilities. Some of us get married. That's a big responsibility. Some of us have kids. Big responsibility. You say, I got to cool down on this. And you see a lot of people stop going to shows, stop getting into the music, okay. And you say, how long can you get older and say, all right, how much longer can I do this? Let's start getting rid of stuff. Can't take it with you. So now, at this ripe old age, me and this maniac, we're buying more than ever. It's ridiculous. So we go to the Dead Daisies concert dinner. I just went to the merchandise stand. I bought the shirt. I bought the autographed CD. I got the sticker. I got the poster. I go, I'm 62 years old. What am I doing?
I just bought a huge part of a guy's Johnny Winter collection.
Okay.
In fact, when we're done doing this, I want to show it. I've been buying from this guy. He was the Johnny Winter maniac, and when Johnny Winter passed away, he got in touch with his ex-wife, who had all his stuff from the 70s. He bought the famous gold snake bracelet from. Wow. Yeah, he has scarves, jackets, jeans, pictures, and I've been buying stuff from him that he's been willing to sell me. Okay. So, this was somebody, I was infatuated with Johnny Winter when I was like 13, 14 years old, and here I am again, 62 years old, and not much has changed.
I think now at this stage of the game, this is what made you happy when you were younger.
Exactly.
And this is what and it still makes us happy.
Right.
So we went to the show the other night, and I had to run up to the front of the stage at the end of the show.
So
I said that to my girlfriend.
But I enjoyed it.
Phil reminds me of like when we were 18. It's like I can't take it no more. I have to get to the front to be like 3 inches away from Glenn Hughes. But I love that because it was like we both were like in awe of him still, and he's always again like when we became friends very early on. He was somebody like when I knew how much he loved him and how much I was like that was like an instant bond. And here we are 40 years after the fact. And there's something to be said about it. It really is. I kind of look at it sometimes. I feel bad for a lot of people that don't have that type of enthusiasm and love for something in their life, because I don't come across that many people that do. I think that's why I've had friends like you and Phil for so long, because we share this,
Right.
So at that point, I'm a 62-year-old up at the front of the stage cheering on a 71-year-old. Yet I felt like I was 17.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
Right. So there's something to be said about it. Because, how many times have we heard as we grow up and through life, like how you stay young is by still acting young, so not that we're doing it forcefully, it just comes natural. So,
well, I think most people, when you as you're growing up, when you hit your teenage years, especially in music, if you get influenced by something at that point, that stays with you your whole life.
Well, I always heard that. The music you'll love for the rest of your life was when you're 17 years old.
Yes.
Okay. So for us, when you think back, if that's 1977, it makes plenty of sense.
Right. Well, yeah, you talk about the bands, the Sabbath and stuff like that. I mean, that was right in that prime period when that stuff was, the biggest thing. So, yeah.
I mean, there was nothing that, in my entire life, I can honestly sit here and say there's nothing that is ever taking me in more than when I discovered hard rock in the 70s. I just remember just like looking at the guys and the album covers and the music and just being so overtaken by it.
Yeah, there was a whole lifestyle. We lived
right.
That was
exactly. You were always a rock guy.
Till night, no
right.
matter what you did.
Whether it was in style or out of style, you were always a rock guy, and you felt a little bit different because you knew all these bands that, everybody knew Led Zeppelin and this, but you knew Legs Diamond and you knew Montrose and you knew, the Edgar Winter Group and stuff like that. And and the 80s was the epitome of that because there were so many bands. Even then, you knew the bands that other guys didn't know. That kind of set you apart.
Right. Well, I think like for me, like, we've talked about this, I'm about 10 years younger than you guys. So for me, it's like I always said I'm an 80s child. I grew up in that arena rock, the hair band era, some people don't like the term, some people whatever it's, you want to say, but for me it's just a way to describe the type of band.
It's actually become a good way to describe. Back then we wouldn't have called it that because it was kind of like dismissive, but it kind of gets the point across of what you like.
It's a description now, right?
Exactly.
I mean, if someone says, "Hey, what kind of music do you listen to?" I'll say I listen to the hair bands, because that it's easy for people to understand exactly what you're talking about. So, I mean, I don't have a problem with the term. I know, like you say, some people don't or whatever. But I'm an '80s kid, so I grew up in the time of when I was going to see the Bon Jovis and the the Teslas and the Skid Rows and all those types of bands. That was kind of my era, in a way. Plus a million other bands. We talk about some of the bands that most people don't even really know about, which we hope that kind of talk about that stuff as we go forward in this podcast. And you and I have talked about this, about what we're going to talk about and different future episodes and stuff like that. And we're going to get real deep into some bands that maybe weren't the most popular bands or whatever, but we're going to kind of get real deep into their discographies and stuff. But what do you anything that's I mean, you saw the Dead Daisy shows, and obviously things have been a little bit crazy for the last year and a half, and there really hasn't been shows to go to. But what have you seen like more recently? What do you listen to anything new, or are you still just listening to the old stuff? Or
mostly the old stuff. I try to listen to new stuff. I try to be open-minded. I don't want to be closed-minded, but I have a very short tolerance, and I'll know in 3 seconds whether I'm going to like it or not. So mostly as far as new, Dead Daisies is not new because they're older, but new band with Glenn Hughes.
Sure.
That album is godlike to me, and I love the Greta Van Fleet, which is a topic of a lot of people don't like them. I don't get it. But
we could do a whole future episode with Phil back here talking about Greta Van Fleet, and
I just think they're amazing.
Yeah, I do too. I've seen them live. I have all this stuff. I just don't get why they're not big. I mean, they're fairly big in the confines of the U.S., but they should, in my opinion, should be an arena act.
Yeah.
But that's the environment.
But the funny thing is, so if I get hungry for new music, I'm finding myself, like I was telling Tom yesterday, I go back and listen to stuff from the 70s that I may have overlooked or didn't give them a fair shot.
Such as?
Well, I listened to, I as the biggest Dio fan, I go back and I listen to Elf, but I just couldn't do it. And I listen to Trapeze as a big Glenn fan, and they're good, but weren't great. So I understand why they weren't. They wouldn't have been heavy enough for me in the 70s to totally get into, because it was tough, because I was judging everything against Black Sabbath, which was hard to do because Black Sabbath by far was the heaviest.
But I did get him to open his ears to Dio Sacred Heart. So.
Oh yeah.
Well, because I like the first two.
It's a different album than the first two. It's not as heavy as the first two. It's not as overproduced as the first two.
But anything Dio, the guy was unbelievable.
That is my favorite Dio album, Sacred Heart. Yeah,
really.
Yeah, the songs are tremendous on it, but it's got a little bit. It's not as macho metally as the first two records were.
Well, we sat there, and a couple weeks ago we were together and we were watching the Rainbow
Munich
77 Munich.
Unbelievable.
DVD.
One of the greatest live shows ever.
Yeah.
Well, and the crazy thing about that, a week after that, I saw James Bird, who was the lead guitarist in Fifth Angel, another band that we adored, write that was the best band, the best lineup, the best concert of all time. And this is just like something, and
even on Ken Tamplin on YouTube made reference to that concert too as being one of the greatest things he's ever saw.
Okay.
And when I saw him twice, that tour with Dio, but the first time at the Beacon Theater, they only played 3 songs.
Really?
Yeah. In the middle of the third song, Blackmore throws his guitar on the floor and walks off the stage. And we wait and we wait and we wait. Dio finally comes on and said, "Listen, Richie can't play with a humming his guitar. We're going to be back. We're going to put on a great show." And they never came back, and Dio was gone. And the funny thing is, if you read the new Dio book, he mentions that in the book.
That show.
Yeah.
About that.
I think he said it might have been the last show of the tour in New York.
Wow.
And Blackmore throws his guitar down and walks off.
And that was 1970.
And he said, "I promised to come back," and it never happened.
Wow. And that was 77.
It was either 77 or 78.
Wow.
Probably 78. Yeah, that's what I would think.
Did you see it? You see him?
I didn't see that show. No.
And then, you saw Rainbow with Graham Bonnet.
Bonnet, great.
Yeah.
Which is an oddity in itself, because you wouldn't have thought, here's Graham Bonnet looking like Mr. Peanut, short hair, in a suit. You wouldn't take to this guy, especially after Dio. But I thought that album was great.
I was never a big... We've argued about this. I never took to that album. I don't dislike it. I just never thought it was anything special.
Lost in Hollywood? Come on.
That was the best song on the album, in my opinion. But I never really warmed up to that album. It just... I don't know. I didn't like him in Rainbow, but... What he did after that was another thing we could do like another episode on, with Alcatraz and Michael Schenker and Pelletieri and countless other things.
Well, we talked about one of the future episodes. We're going to do an in-depth on the Michael Schenker group, right?
Yeah, and I'd like to do that with Phil also. I think that would be a good in-depth Michael Schenker group discography.
Yeah, I think that would be very cool. So, anything else that you wanted to talk with Phil about that?
Just off the top of my head, if you had to pick 3 artists that identified or identifies who you love the most, who would you say? And
I have to say Black Sabbath, no matter what.
Correct.
Black Sabbath, that's it. Because that started this whole thing. And then, of course, anything Dio, so you want to pick Rainbow Dio. And then the third is tough. I mean, because I hate to name something because there's probably 15 other bands I should mention,
How about Uriah Heep?
I loved Earl, but Byron, period.
Okay.
Byron was that period.
He's very picky with Uriah Heep. He's not as open-minded as we are. I think he likes maybe some.
I don't like lineup
stuff.
changes, and I especially don't like singing lineup changes because while a lot of guys focus on the guitar, I was always into the singer.
Okay.
That's
me too.
And then I have to mention Riot because they were those albums the early albums were so great, and even the Red Forest album was so great, and they were like the neighborhood band for me. So it was like that was my band. Twisted Sister too.
Okay.
Because we went to see them constantly, and they were like neighborhood bands, and it was only first in the neighborhood, and then in, the state, and then in tri-state, and then obviously Twisted Sister made it. Riot really, they almost made it.
Right.
But yeah, so I have to give special shout out to those guys.
Guy Speranza used to come to the store.
Yeah, he was in the store, yeah.
Zig Zag customer.
Yeah. We did Twisted Sister in store also, I forgot.
Okay.
But here's the thing, Mark, I just wanted to mention before you close this. The amazing thing to me is how many people remember the stores. Some remember Brooklyn, some remember Staten Island, some remember both. But now, so many years after the fact, that I can meet people still. Now it's going to be people, older people, and say, what did you do? Where did you live? Oh, I had a store. Where? In Brooklyn. What store? Zig Zag. I used to shop there. It's like, it's unbelievable and how people so fondly remember it, and it's just amazing. And you're wearing a Zig Zag shirt. People are making Zig Zag shirts.
That's right.
I bought someone made a Zig Zag painting of the front of the store. The original signs are hanging up on display somewhere in Brooklyn.
Wow. No, it's
the Staten Island Advance some months ago did an article, the most places missed on Staten Island. They talk about Zig Zag Records.
I saw that.
Wow.
Who knew?
Right.
We were just jerky kids hanging out, having a good time listening to music.
Right.
But you realize how many people you influenced and how many people fondly remember it. It's amazing.
Well, that was a great thing about independent records. Like you said, the fact that you gravitate towards, if you were a certain type of fan of a certain type of music, and you found your crowd, you found your people. You could go there, you could hang out all day long. You could listen to music, you could talk music, and it was like that's so influential.
And let's give Vintage Vinyl a shout out because even though there might have been competition, never really was competition, but they lasted so long and it's such an amazing place, and all those live in-store appearances, absolutely amazing. And to have them close now too.
I know, it's almost like it seems like a final nail in the coffin.
Because I started to become a fan again. I wasn't an owner. I would go and I need to buy stuff. Well, that's where I would go.
Sure.
And I enjoyed it. Then I started getting into, let's go to the record store. This is great. And then they closed. So.
Yeah.
But what you were saying about different genres of music and independent records, that's how the Village was when I started going to the Village. I'd say about 74, 75 when I was 14, 15.
Right.
And you'd go to, there was so many record stores, but a lot of it wasn't stuff you'd like. You'd walk in, it was a punk store. I remember you'd walk in and you'd feel like intimidated as a 14-year-old kid because there were these older punk guys in there and you'd be like, I got to get out of here quick.
Yeah.
And then there was the new wave stores, and then you'd walk into a store and it was a hard rock store, and you'd feel, that I'd talk to Phil and we'd say, oh, we like the same records. We used to go spend some of our weekends going to St. Mark's Sound to Record Shop and then Chinatown.
Yeah. And you missed that whole thing. That's another topic for another day.
Right.
I had a brief when I was about maybe 15. My summers I would used to go to It's Only Rock and Roll. Those stores all in that area down in the Village, and that was
the Village was. I used to just take days off from work and spend the entire day.
Yeah. And then you could go. So it wasn't. It was the whole arts and music culture, obviously Greenwich Village. But you could go there, and then you would go to Forbidden Planet, the bookstore.
That's right.
And then you would go to Trash and Vaudeville clothes store.
Right.
And then you would go to Capizio's, because, of course, in the 70s, you had to have Capizio's or you weren't anything. And then, of course, you went to Ray's Pizza. So it was just the whole, it was great. It was, and then all the other oddball stores I could mention, just crazy stores, with antiques and toys and anything you could think of was all there. So,
well, I once walked in the Trash and Vaudeville with a friend of mine, and who was in there with David Johansen.
Yeah.
Really?
So yeah.
Well, I always used to see quote unquote rock stars there walking the streets. Always. I remember Daryl Hall. You could, especially those days. Lenny Kaye was all over the place buying records from Patti Smith Band. You could run into anybody over there.
Yeah.
But
Billy Squire lived down there somewhere. At a time, used to run into him.
Okay.
I remember what really set me off going back there again, because I had initially used to go there in the 70s. And then when I met him, and I'd look for different, I say, for instance, like a Legs Diamond album. I remember I had found the first one in his store, found the third one in his store, couldn't get the second one. Diamond is a hard rock.
Great record.
Well, where do I go now? I have to go to the Village and unearth every store. And I did find a copy. And I remember telling him, I got it. So that was just it was a great time. It was a great era of the 80s because this country was a great place to live.
Yeah.
Well, that's how you did it. I mean, like you said, if you were looking for music, I mean, there wasn't the internet. There wasn't, I'm going to order it from Amazon or I'm going to order it from eBay.
Which was great.
Yeah.
It was great because it was the hunt and the search.
I was just going to say, yeah. Yeah, it was more fun, even though you couldn't easily get what you wanted. There was the thrill of the hunt.
Absolutely. It was
like you finally found it.
Right. You find that Legs Diamond album. That day I felt like I hit the lottery ticket. In fact, if you told me lottery ticket, Legs Diamond, I'm going Legs Diamond. But that's how it was, because you really had to work for your collection. And it made it fun. And it made, you'd go to bed with it on your mind and wake up. I go to work the next morning. I got to get a day off to go to the Village to look for this, that, and the other thing. It really was, you were just consumed with it.
We have time for more stories?
Of course.
Oh, so let's go here. So in the 80s, I would go to England looking for records. And it was great. And I remember going to Reddington's Rare Records in Birmingham.
Okay.
So here's the Black Sabbath fan going to Birmingham, England to buy records. And I did find the Black Sabbath 45 there.
Yeah.
But I used to, so then I had made multiple trips, made some friends, had a place to stay. So I used to ship records by boat. In those days, they had sea mail. You don't remember sea mail?
Yeah.
You do? You could ship over stuff relatively, not cheap, but cost effective. I could ship over a box of records to England by boat. It would take a month and a half, 2 months to get there.
Right.
But I'd send it to my friend's house. And when I had a few hundred records there, I would go. So now I have records and I would go trade. Because they were after American promos and I was after, hard rock independent singles.
You were working at Zig Zag at that point?
I think at that point I think the first time I worked there, and then afterwards I owned it, but then I had to stop going because I owned it.
Right.
Responsibility.
Yeah.
But that was amazing. And I had seen early new wave, like I said, early new wave heavy metal bands. I saw in England. I saw Angel Witch and Rock Goddess and Girl School in England at the time.
Wow.
And just another quick story. We did the Motorhead install. And he said, it was probably around 82. He said, and they were really, really cool guys. Really cool guys. And we said, hey, I'm planning a trip. In a few months, we're going. Any way you could recommend that we go? Could we hook up or whatever? He goes, yeah, go to this bar. I think it was called Grey Bay. Go to this bar in London. Well, when? Anytime. Anytime during the week? Yeah, just go to that bar. So sure enough, a friend of mine, Frank, who I went with, we just picked a day. We go to that bar, and don't you know that some of the crew and I forget, it might have been Phil DiBenedetto hanging out at that bar. It might have been a Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and there they are. They're in the bar.
So that's another thing I want to talk about. You talked about like shipping albums over and this and that and everything. That Zig Zag became like kind of a popular place for imports. Is that was?
Yes, that's yeah. Credit to the original owner. Yeah, in fact, that's before me. They sponsored WNEW things from England.
Oh, okay.
And one of the employees, Bob, would go. His thing was to get the new imports and bring them to WNEW to play.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know personally, like for me, when I started going to the Staten Island store, that was kind of like I just was starting to get into imports, and Tom will know this. Like there was some mail order companies at the time. Like there was Dream Disc out of Indiana, and there was a couple other stores in the Midwest there.
Right.
And I would just call these guys up, and they would tell me about, well, what do you like? And I'd be like, well, I like this, and well, then you'll probably like this, band from wherever in Europe or something. And that's how I started. So I was just starting to get into buying imports myself, and of course that's after when the '80s kind of like. And everybody talks about that famous story, Nirvana killed the hard rock, at that time. And so I was like starving for music that sounded anything.
Oh, yeah. Well, Dream Disc was a great play. Brian Erickson was the main guy that owned that. And terrific guy. He was like the Midwest Phil.
Okay.
So anything that I couldn't get from him I was dying to have, I would call them. And Brian would either have it or make it his business to get it for me. But that was also, again, before, you could get stuff like just a couple of clicks on the computer.
Right. Well, that was the thing. Like I said, I was ordering stuff, mail order from those places. And then when I find Zig Zag and Staten Island, I walk in, there's this wall full of like import stuff. And I was like, oh my God.
And you remember Mike Shannon in the UK?
No.
Yeah. Mike Shannon was just another guy that you used to order directly from. I think he was related. He either worked for Shades back in the day or he did an offshoot from Shades.
Oh, okay.
I shopped in Shades when I went.
Did you?
Yeah.
I want to say
it wasn't that great when you were disappointed when you went in, but it was obviously it was cool.
Right.
You were thinking like this.
Mike Shannon was a guy that had like everything, like anything I couldn't get from Phil. But after a while, I was pestering him so much, he would go out of his way to find distributors. Like I was really on his back constantly about Jap imports, and after a while, he was basically getting me. He was getting everything for my fix.
Yeah, well, same for me. I mean, I would just, tell you, I need this, I need that, and you'd order it, and then it would be there the next week or a week, 2 weeks later. Japanese imports, whatever it was, So that was.
Then he'd call me up at work and say, "You have a pile of your shit here. When you coming in to get it?"
Right. Same thing with me. I'd have the big pile with my name on.
You broke my chops to get it, and it's been sitting here for 2 days. Where are you?
Right. Exactly. Well, that's another thing that was so great about like going to record stores and everything, and you don't have it anymore. Like you said, you click away on the internet or Amazon or whatever it is, and you're ordering something today.
I think one of the most fun things about this, and unfortunately for the musicians that didn't make money at it and put a lot of time and effort in, but for us as fans, I think one of the most fun things is that you were into these bands that were really good, and nobody knew who they were.
Right.
Because they were like your band. Like I was saying with Riot,
right? And you almost resented the couple of guys here and there that got big.
Yeah,
it's like, how dare you?
It was like that with Twisted Sister,
right? Like there's 5 of us in the world that know and love you. Yeah. How dare there be like a couple of thousand people?
Right, they weren't yours anymore.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And I have felt that way. Again, our mutual favorite bands of all time is Black Sabbath. I have felt that way about Black Sabbath for the last 20 years because we grew up in an era where they weren't played on the radio. They weren't allowed to be played on the radio.
Right.
And they were not a band that were popular at all. Yet the weird thing is when you went to go see them at the Garden, and I saw them in Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, Sabotage, and Never Say Die, the Garden would be sold out.
Sure.
And again, it reminded me of wrestling when we used to watch wrestling on Channel 47 with the rabbit ears, and you would think, who watches this? And then I go to a wrestling match in the 70s, and the Garden was sold out.
Yeah.
So it was that cool undergroundness of it that was just priceless.
When was the only time Black Sabbath was played on New York radio?
It wasn't WNEW.
Yes.
It was?
Once a year.
Once a year?
Halloween night.
Okay.
Alison Steele would play the song Black Sabbath. That was it.
Wow. No, because they've become such a household name, which quite honestly sucks because they were the complete antithesis of that.
Sure.
But people don't either believe us or comprehend. They were not played on FM radio at all.
No.
At all.
Well, nothing really was that was good. In order to get any new music or not even underground, but just anything, you would have to go at the middle of the night on your radio and get college stations.
Right.
Well,
right? You wouldn't hear UFO, Judas Priest, Ted Nugent.
Correct.
None of that.
Right.
None of that.
What were some?
Well, Nugent broke through.
But Tom, on the radio?
Cat Scratch Fever. That's 75-ish. I mean,
that wasn't played on any New York radio. WNEW was playing Cat Scratch Fever. No way.
I mean, you mentioned like college radio stations. I mean, I being from Jersey, and it was a pretty strong broadcast signal they played into New York. But WSOU from
changed my life. That WSOU is what put me over the edge with the 80s.
But now I could say I listened to a lot, and I discovered a lot of bands from listening to WSOU. But like you talked about, like, you know, the underground bands at the time, they were the Sabbaths or whoever. Like, what other college radio stations around here were playing that music?
I don't remember the stations because I used to have the transistor radio and just see what you could get at 1 o'clock.
Well, there was
the
WBAB out of Babylon. Definitely,
Long
because
Island.
I remember I heard Kick Axe for the first time on there. They used to play a lot of the Canadian stuff. I heard Helix for the first time on there.
Wow.
BAB in the early to mid '80s.
I remember that station. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was a week. I used to buy from Radio Shack. It was called a signal booster,
Okay.
and it would boost your FM signal, and so you could pull in BAB stronger. But BAB was kind of ahead of its time. They especially with the Canadian
It
stuff.
was weird, right? Because we were so hungry for new music in our genre. And you would think, not like today, you would really have to work to try to find
Correct.
it. So it was either magazines, college radio.
Yeah, I left no stone unturned. I really did. I left no stone unturned.
Record stores to try to find something new to listen to.
Every
We were
piece
so
of knowledge I
hungry for
had
it.
was very hard worked for. None of it came by somebody telling me. It was all me.
Right.
I came from a very non-musical family. You know, I didn't have an older brother or sister that was into this stuff. I had parents that weren't into music. Wherever I came from, I don't know. But anything I learned over the years was from me.
Yeah. Well, I say the same thing about myself. You know, I
never had a
where
mentor.
I got that music bug.
Yeah.
You know?
Right, exactly. So it's...
So we were lucky because, as I said, the era. I don't want to sound old. I am old, but I don't want to sound old. But, and like I said, we are music guys, so we're open to listen to anything. Probably you two more than me, but I like different genres of music that you don't like.
Yes.
But there's just nothing out there. There's very few, even with the internet, where we could seek out things. I don't know. It's a whole different lifestyle.
Well, the industry in the United States is just shut down for hard rock, and another thing that I've grown to resent is that the amount of these cover bands and copy bands have even made it more suffocating for new bands.
Yeah.
That I've got to the point that I've never been me and him, we didn't grow up in a cover band era. We grew up in an era where the actual bands played, but we become such obsessed with cover bands, and
I mean, a lot of the groups we saw did play covers, but not.
they play a cover song or two, right?
Yeah, Zebra,
right.
Twisted Sister
Right.
played cover, but not entirely.
Right.
They just threw some in. It
Sure.
wasn't the total cover bands. Matter of fact, in those days, didn't they want original bands? Where then all they wanted was cover bands. That's like today.
Yeah.
You're going to go play a bar, you got to be a cover band.
Well, totally flipped around because,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, Zebra took off. I saw Zebra in Long Island back in the day. It was way before they were signed to that first record. It was in the 70s.
Mhm.
And Zebra was selling themselves on the Led Zeppelin thing. And the biggest reason was because the singer
Yeah.
was able to do a drop-dead vintage
Right.
Robert Plant.
Yeah.
So that was a way. I saw them at a place called Hammerheads in Long Island, and probably, I don't know, it was way before that first album, maybe 77-ish.
Do you remember Hammerheads?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
You do?
With
Okay,
the
yeah.
octopus?
That I don't.
They had a big octopus in the
I
back.
don't remember that. I mean, I was never there. I remember.
Oh, okay. You never there.
Rum Bottoms.
Yep.
That's where instead of going to, when I used to venture out of Brooklyn, instead of going to Jersey, we used to go to Long Island because you were right by the Bell Parkway and Gerritsen
Right.
Beach, and that's where we used to go out. But I saw them back there way before, but he was able to do Jackson, and unbelievable.
Yes.
He had Robert Plant better than Robert Plant did.
Now, were
at that
they
time.
doing the Zeppelin sets?
It was
were they
entirely Zeppelin.
and then they would play some of
Other
their own
stuff.
material, or it was,
Moody Blues. They would play Moody
That's
Blues.
right. They used to do Moody Blues
Yeah.
too, but no originals. When I saw them,
they
no
weren't
originals.
even doing
No.
originals at that
It
point.
was Zeppelin and a couple of Moody Blues songs.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
but this is again that first album came out in
83.
That would
80.
And there, how
Oh, this was the 70s. This
how
was
underrated was they with that first album? That's a great.
Oh
record.
yeah. No, that's a classic album.
What album did the first Zebra come out?
83.
Monk said 83. Yeah,
Once
I saw them in the 70s. I remember it was, I would say 78, 79 tops. But that's what they were doing. They
It's
were doing
just
Zeppelin shows.
strictly a cover band at that point.
But drawing, like, I remember when the night I saw them, lucky you got in. I remember driving out there and being like, we're not getting in here tonight.
That's another phenomenon because, as we were talking about, you can go to a club, then Twisted Sister, Zebra, Good Rats.
The Good Rats, yes.
Let's just go on and on and on. Riot. You just go
Yeah,
on
Long
and
Island
on.
had a really good scene in the very late 80s.
Well, I was
the
going
70s.
to bring up Twisted Sister.
Is it that way today?
No.
I don't know.
No, there's no scene. That's in the entire U.S. There's no scene.
Well, it's like you said. I mean, you go and it's mostly like cover bands or tribute bands.
That's the thing, and I never was a cover band guy to per se. Not that I couldn't watch one, but I feel like now it's actually suffocating the chance of any new band.
Yeah.
It doesn't really make sense, does it? Why do I want to go pay $80 to see a Fleetwood Mac cover band?
Right.
Or the Zeppelin cover band? Or the Queen cover band? So
Yeah.
would you rather do that or see a new band that's
Right.
a rock band?
Right.
Because we've become such an immediate society, nobody wants to digest new music.
Yeah.
You see, we're three guys that we've done this our whole life. I love digesting new music as long as it's the sound that I like. People just don't have it. It's like why nobody reads newspapers anymore.
Right.
Nobody reads books. Nobody
Yeah.
could watch a baseball game without wanting to change baseball because it's too slow.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear something. They want to hear a song that they've heard for 40 years and could be any five goofballs up there playing it. They're going to be, oh, this is great.
Right. Well, that's why stuff like the streaming, like the Spotify's and everything, it's instant. Like you said, everybody's.
It's the society we live in. It seems to be more. It seems to be more so in the U.S. because I am very plugged in with a lot of overseas friends in the overseas scene, which I know you are too, Mark.
Yeah.
It seems like the Europeans, the Japanese have more of a welcoming heart for new bands.
They've always been a very diehard.
Yes,
fan
but the
base
U.S.
too,
is
though.
just, it's very immediate, and yeah, give me a band that's doing a Journey song I've had 10,000 times. I'd rather listen to that than Greta Van Fleet or,
Right.
It's disappointing, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, we hope to basically keep expanding on that and future subjects as we continue on with the podcast. And it's only episode 1, so we hope you guys enjoyed that little talk with Phil. We thank our special guest, Phil DiBenedetto.
We'll be back many times.
My pleasure.
And yeah, we hope to have you back. And like I said,
When we go
talked about
video,
other stuff.
we're going to do a memorabilia show. So.
There you go.
I'm
He brought a
gonna
couple of things over today, but we didn't have the chance to
I'm
do
going to
that.
have to go into the Zig Zag archive.
Go into the archives because when we go video,
That's right. Yeah. So anyway, I guess that's probably covers this episode. Number 1 is in
Absolutely.
the books, and appreciate it. Everybody listening. Hope everybody enjoyed the show, and hopefully we'll be back on a weekly basis, uploading brand new episodes as we go along. So we'll see you then. Bye.